Thanks, Sandrine. What a powerful introduction. But before we continue on to the next bit, we're going to take a little bit of a short pause. Not a break to get up and leave, just a moment of reset. A moment to breathe and to come back to this conversation in really powerful presence. So to guide us through a very short energy shift, please welcome to the stage from Green is the New Black, Paula Michaelis.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Good? Okay. So this morning, I'm here to talk about power, right? And I'm sure you came here to this summit wanting to project your power, wanting to be seen as influential, as powerful, right? But today I'm here about sharing some awesome ways to increase your power authentically. Because power can be destructive, but it also can be deeply healing. And when we think about a deeply healing power, here's what I believe. I believe it's about being present. And often in this world, we're trained to just project something, to lead the narrative, to control everything. We're trained to be a leader only. And we forgot that to be a leader, we have to be present to ourselves in order to learn how to be led as well. So in a moment, but not now, I'm going to get you to stand up, take a deep breath, turn to someone you don't know, and you're going to choose the role you want to have. Either you're going to be leading or you want to be led. Okay? So here you go. Stand up. Turn to someone you know or you don't know, preferably you don't know. Just turn your body to this person. Say hi. Take a deep breath with me. And just decide the role you want to have. Either you're going to be leading or you're going to be led. Just decide within yourself and discuss the role with your partner. Okay, so now you have your role, and you're just going to simply, it's very simple but very powerful, and that will increase your power and your presence for the rest of the day, okay? You're just going to look at each other's eyes without saying any words and just be in your power, in your presence, either as the leader or the person leading. Just do it. I know it can feel uncomfortable. You might notice some sensations in your body, in your mind. Whatever it is, it's all good, all fine. Just take this moment to really being present with yourself and with your partner. In this world, we're not even looking at each other's eyes. We just forget. We have our own agenda. And here's your minute to just change that and increase your presence and increase your power. Notice the stories which are happening in your minds. You might be smiling at yourself, at the other person. You might be uncomfortable or freaking out. That's all good. For once in your life, you're just being present with yourself and with the other person. Okay, we're gonna take a deep breath now in the eyes with your partner. 1, 2, 3, in and out. And then the last one, in and out. And if you feel the call to, you can just thank your partner, maybe hugging your partner. And I hope you enjoyed this little moment. And this exercise is here for you at any time now. And I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Does everybody feel zen and ready for this next session? Because we're about to get into a juicy conversation. We've taken a moment to look at the bigger picture, and now we're getting into what it means on the ground when it comes to moving forward. Because the pressure of that organizations are under right now is incredibly real. The political shifts, the market uncertainty, everybody essentially pulling companies in different directions. And through it all, businesses are still expected to lead. So, and to hold the line, to make the right calls and to make the right choices. And this conversation is looking at how businesses are navigating that space in real time right now. I'm going to be joined by three brilliant panelists. The panelists for this session are the CEO of Rexel, Guillaume Texier, the chair of the executive board of KPMG, Marie Guillemot, and the president and CEO of the Business School for Responsibility, Aaron Kramer. Please welcome them to the stage. Hello, hello, welcome. We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time to cover it in, so I'm going to dive straight in with the tough questions. Guillaume, I'm going to start with you. We're seeing companies right now scale back their commitments when it comes to climate, and others are holding really steady. What do you think is actually making the difference in terms of those companies that are pulling back versus those that are almost doubling down?
Look, I think first of all, when you're running a company, your job as a CEO is to assess where the world is going and to keep the direction stable in this direction. It's not about short term, it's about long-term vision. Now, I'll take an example. You cannot afford to take sharp turns. If you turn left and right every year, depending on where the wind is blowing, then you're going to lose your ecosystem. You're going to really lose your customers, lose your employees, and you're not going to be able to do it efficiently. I will take an example that I know best, which is my company. We are the middleman between, Rexel is the middleman between the manufacturers of electrical material and the installation ecosystem, small electricians, big electricians. And our role in the energy transition is to move them, to convince them to push photovoltaic panels, to push heat pumps, to push sensors, etc., etc. And to do that in a world which is quite conservative requires a lot of consistency. You cannot afford to change direction. So I think that's really, really important. And the second thing, to come back to your question, the second thing which makes the difference between companies which do it, which take this direction and keep it, and the others is probably also to what extent you are able to transform the constraints into opportunities. And for us, it was relatively easy. We were in the middle of the electrification ecosystem, right from the beginning. So obviously, it is in our best interest to continue to push in this direction. But for other companies, it's a little bit more difficult, and they need to pivot their business models, which is something which may require effort. So I think that's what makes the difference.
Yeah, turning the constraints into opportunities. Aaron, in your line of business, you see a lot of organizations. Are you seeing a trend between the difference between those that are scaling back and those that are really doubling down and wanting to push faster?
First of all, I'd like to agree vigorously with what Guillaume said. No company can afford to go back and forth and back and forth. That's not strategic. You lose the trust and faith of your investors, your employees, your customers. That's not a solid approach. Look, two things are happening at the same time. One is that the cost and impact of climate is growing, and it's growing exponentially by the day, and that creates costs, that creates uncertainty, that creates the urgency to act, and that's very important. At the same time, the complexities of the transition are very real. Companies are struggling to achieve their Scope 3 goals, for example. Why is that? It's partly because the supply of clean energy is not distributed well everywhere that it needs to be. And so there are a lot of uncertainties, there are a lot of dependencies and so on. In this situation, there's a lot of debate over whether companies should scale back their goals. It won't surprise you that I will say I don't think that is a good idea. And I think companies need to stay focused, as Guillaume says, on the future, and we need room for aspiration. Companies should not be deterred by the fact that achieving their goals one year to the next may be challenging. We have to keep to the North Star of where we need to get, and it is a clean energy economy, and we need to make the things happen and shift business models to make it possible to achieve those goals.
So I love the idea of a North Star, because the North Star isn't going anywhere. We can't just keep flip-flopping. Marie, I could see you nodding your head yes quite profusely there.
Yes, 100% aligned with that. To me, the leadership is really key in this moment of truth, because leadership means purpose, and this is a North Star, and you have to really reflect on the mission of your company and stick to that. And this is absolutely key to stay at the helm in this moment. And second, leadership also means a vision, and I do agree that we have to onboard people with a positive and inspiring narrative today. So we have to have that, and we have not to say we have to change overnight the business model. We have to combine performance, to combine investment for the long term. We have to innovate. So this is why we have a strong need for a compelling vision. And finally, it's also courage. And some CEOs need really to engage very bold conversation in the room today, because not only you have to convince your teams, middle management to act, but deliberately you have to convince your investors, your all stakeholders, and board members sometimes are also keen to engage in this.
Marie, I love that you brought up the word courage, because let's face it, leaders are wrestling with trade-offs, right? We've got short-term pressure to meet the immediate goals, and that's got to be balanced against the longer-term ambitions, and I think that's probably some of what's seeing people scale back. So how should leaders decide what they keep and what goes, so we're not just, that trade-off isn't creating so much tension? Aaron?
Well, businesses face complicated decisions about trade-offs all the time. Let me add to the point about having a North Star, but also say that companies and business leaders need also to have some red lines, some things they will not give up. And my good friend Sandrine spoke about men in the San Francisco Bay Area, guilty as charged, but not a tech bro, I have to say. So I'll defend myself a bit there. But I think there has been a lack of courage, and American businesses and American business leaders are not defending their red lines, are not, and let me give one specific example. There is an attack on the term DEI in the United States, and in fact, the current administration has informed companies in France that they have expectations of French companies as well. Well, I think business leaders need to remain focused on the fact that our societies are growing more diverse by the hour. Demographics tell you that. And so there are some things that you cannot trade off, and one of them, in my view, is an ongoing commitment to inclusive workplaces, inclusive economies, respect for diversity, which at the end of the day is about nothing more than basic fairness. So that's something you can't trade off. That should be a red line that companies and business leaders won't cross.
Red lines, I think, are super important, and I love that you bring that up. When there's a trade-off, the first thing is, what are the red lines? Marie, what do you see when it comes to these trade-offs? How do business leaders make those decisions?
Well, they're used to face and to address dilemmas. So today they are really critical. And it's not only to do what is right and what is appropriate based on your red lines and your purpose-led strategy, but it's also to ensure resilience and performance for the future. So they have to be right, based on facts, based on measurements, and they have to consider the timeline of the shifts, the allocation of capex investment that they have to put on the table to invest. But really, really, this is the way they can ensure performance for the future. It's costly today, but it would be even costlier in the future. And it's not only, it could be a disaster in terms of financials, but also in terms of reputation. And what I see is that leaders really do pay attention to reputation today in terms of financial, but also social and environmental branding.
So it's also a matter of thinking of long-term reputation. It would be remiss of me not to pop over to you, Guillaume, as the business leader on the panel. How are you at Rexel tackling these trade-offs?
You know, I think first of all, we live in a world of constraints, for sure. And I can have all the courage I want. If I ignore the constraints, I'm not going to be the CEO for long. So at some point, you need to find the right path. And I think the path is to keep the direction. And then if you keep the direction, you can accelerate, you can slow down, you can change a little bit the wording of what you do, but you want to go always in the same direction. And a good example for us is what's happening in the US. I mean, the US for Rexel, it's the largest country by far. And obviously, talking about sustainability, energy transition those days, in a world and in an ecosystem which is quite conservative, is not that popular. But that being said, we continue to go in the same direction, and we have very interesting discussions with our customers and employees, because we need to explain why. And it comes down to what you were saying. First of all, first argument, it's about the long-term interest of the company. It's my job to try to understand where the world is going and to steer the company in this direction so that we are there early compared to others. It's in our best interest, and they understand that. And also, it's in our best interest short-term in many cases. In many cases, we uncover opportunities for our own customers. They can go into new segments, they can install solar panels, they can install energy-saving devices. It's a question of us educating them to that and to bringing them new short-term opportunities. And last but not least, when you're talking about diversity, that's exactly what we are doing. We are telling them, hey, you know what? In a world where finding good people is extremely difficult, diversity is not a constraint. It's an opportunity. So, those are interesting discussions, but I believe that if you keep the same direction, adapting maybe the words and adapting the speeds, you can really be consistent and continue to go in the right place.
What I'm hearing underneath that is where some business leaders are looking at the challenges and the constraints and adjusting so much for the short term that they're almost making up, we have to look at this short term thing because the short term, it doesn't lead into the long term. What I'm hearing you're doing at Rexel is going, well, we're going to look at the long term, and ironically, it seems to have short term benefits.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is. I mean, for us, it may be a little bit easier, but I truly believe that in most economic sectors, you can find this path of transforming a constraint into a short-term benefit.
Fabulous. So one thing I am interested in, we kind of touched on diversity a little bit, Aaron. Who are we paying attention to now that we weren't paying attention to, let's say, 5 years ago? And how is that shaping how businesses and organizations are leading and acting in this new world? Aaron, as you touched on diversity first, I'll jump in with you first.
Well, it's very interesting because in some ways, the answer to your question is who you listen to has changed fundamentally, and in some ways it hasn't. So I think one group that companies have to pay attention to are employees, and I'll apologize to Marie, I'm going to cite a survey from Deloitte and say that they do an annual survey of employees globally. 61% said they felt their company should be paying more attention to climate, more attention to diversity. So you always have to listen to your employees. But the way things have changed is, I think we who believe in the transitions we're talking about here are not listening to the people who are just going about their daily lives trying to make it through. We talk a lot at events like this about the so-called real economy, but that's language that doesn't resonate with real people. And so I think we have to do a much better job of making this very simple and tangible, whether it's diversity, whether it's climate, whether it's water, whatever the issue, and make it real so that people can see themselves in the transitions that we're talking about, because all of the data that Sandrine showed, I think, comes from the fact that the average person doesn't see themselves in the world that we all believe in. So we have to do a better job of listening to them and then communicating effectively in real language for real people.
So we need to adjust our communication styles to connect with people's real lived experience rather than assuming that everybody's got the same background. Marie, what do you think? Are you seeing that new voices are coming into the fold as part of the dialogue that weren't there years ago, that we were just kind of brushing over?
Well, 3 years ago, KPMG adopted a purpose-led status for its action and strategy. And the first pillar is talents. And for sure, it's obvious in a people business, but this is where we really listen more to the next generation of our people, of leaders. And my team is here in this room, and I'm very proud of this initiative. And it changes a bit the way we look at the talent experience at KPMG. What I want to raise here is where we put more attention to in terms of clients. And today we see that many COOs in the companies are really facing huge challenges, not only because of supply chain shocks, but also energy transition, but also new ways of sourcing their materials and so on and so forth. So we really work side by side with them because it's so challenging today. Second is around AI. And Sandrine mentioned that it's not really, might not be the good way to do it, but AI could also help our clients to reduce the energy cost. So this is a way to decarb, but also a way to be more performance, to gain more performance. And third is on HR. And the HR piece is really critical. When you have to undertake a profound transformation, you have to define an appropriate change management program with the right timing, the right speed, the right positive narrative. You have to onboard people. You have to change objectives, incentives, and this is really what we are doing with our clients.
Love that. So I'm hearing that there's new people, senior executives within organizations that historically weren't necessarily engaging in the same way, now starting to really feel the pressure. Guillaume, I kind of need some real life examples from you. Like, give me some examples. What, in your line of business, do you find that there are new clients, customers, individuals you're listening to now that perhaps you weren't paying as much attention to 5 years ago?
I think compared to 5 years ago, we pay much more attention to two categories of people, the pioneers on one hand and the laggards on the other hand. And I'm going to start with them. We pay a lot of attention to small customers, small electricians. They are far away from sustainability, far away from change now. They have to face, on a day-to-day basis, the trade-offs that you were talking about, Aaron. The trade-offs between the cost of products and the benefits. It's difficult for them to explain sustainability to their own customers. And I think paying a lot of attention to them, to the way to educate them, giving them the tools, the pitches to push sustainability is something which is very important because that's how you move the needle. And then pioneers also. In our ecosystem, suppliers are very important. And what we do is we look at the suppliers, those suppliers who are really in advance, pushing the agenda of sustainability, to try to partner with them to set an example. And many of them are here today, but we need to set an example. So you have to do both. You have to work on both extremes, on the laggards and the pioneers.
I love that. I think a lot of people, the pioneers are almost the easy ones. We get them on board and eventually the laggards would catch up. So I love that you say, we need to work with the pioneers, but we also need to take a few steps back and think about those people who aren't on board yet and what can we do to support them to move forward. I kind of want to end with shifts that you're seeing in the market, and Guillaume, I'll start with you. What's one decision that you've made recently that shows how sustainable thinking is changing within your business?
Look, I mean, I want to finish this discussion on a note of optimism. One thing which has been very impressive to me is that we have put on the market a tool for our customers to measure the carbon impact of what they are buying. It's not just an Excel spreadsheet. It's using a little bit of artificial intelligence because the data very often doesn't exist. So we have to approximate it, etc. And what I find very interesting is the success of this tool. Many large customers, large corporates, are embarking on that because they have their own personal commitments, corporate commitments on scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And what it tells me is that obviously political ambition is very important. But for the first time in decades, I think that the energy and the commitments of the private sector has the ability to also relay it. And so the government ambition may be a little bit weaker in some countries, but private companies, the movement is gone, and nothing is going to stop it.
I love the movements there. Aaron, what are you seeing in terms of what's the big shift that you're seeing is happening in organizations right now?
I think the big shift is taking big goals, big ambition, big language, and making sure it gets put into action. So I'll give you an example, something I've had the privilege of participating in. Volkswagen has long had an external advisory board, and they would come in and meet with the board and talk about the broad direction of the world. And some new leadership came in and said, we don't really need that. We know what the broad direction is. So they've created a new model, which I think is really interesting, which has 12 of us on 4 different issues, working with 12 people internally. So it's much more practical, it's much more operational, and yes, the vision is a part of it, but as the saying goes, a vision without a plan is just a dream. This is an idea to turn the dream into reality, and so I think this speaks to a shift that we're seeing with a lot of our member companies, saying, okay, great, we've got our big goal, let's get after it. How are we actually going to do it? And that's essential.
Get moving to implementation, baby. If you weren't there at the opening, you won't get the joke. Anyhow, Marie, what about you? What's a big shift that you're seeing?
I think the biggest shift that I see is that sustainability and the shift in business model is not a standalone shift. It's more, it requires more cooperation across value chains. And we see really industry leaders really committed to action, committed to implement this, not only for their own corporate, but their ecosystem. And this is where I see the best impact coming forward, because they would bring all the industry value chain on board, so provoking a speeder shift.
So we're moving to a much, much bigger shifts where we're not just looking at sustainable business models and climate as 2 separate things, but integrating those 2 things, that sustainability is part of the business model.
Yes, and integrating all the players, not only the leaders in the value chain for the industry, but also the people upstream and downstream.
What a fantastic shift to see. I wish I had more time with you to ask you yet more questions. Please give the panel a warm round of applause.
Thank you.